Hi, welcome to Fireside Snack. Let's grab a snack and sit down to chat. We're Abby and Gabby, two recovery coaches eager to share our lived and professional experience in the world of mental health and eating disorders. In our time together, we hope to grab a bite to eat and connect with ourselves and each other. Our hope with this podcast is to inspire you to take care of yourself by building a life you don't want to run away from. As a disclaimer, the information shared in this podcast is based on the personal experiences of Abby and Gabby and is intended for informational purposes only. It is not a substitute for professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. If you are seeking support or have concerns about your mental health, please consult with a licensed professional. Enjoy your fireside snack.
Welcome to our podcast where we talk about all things eating disorders from lived experience, current research, and multiple perspectives in the field. Excited to have you join. I'm repeating myself. I'm so excited. But we start each and every episode off with one of my favorite parts, snacks. So Gabby, what are we having today?
Okay, this is going to be a huge surprise. I have Le Croix. I actually am going out of town soon, and so I'm trying to drink them as fast as possible, which is probably, I don't know what I should be doing with seltzer water. I don't know if I should be drinking as fast as possible, but that's what I'm doing. And then I have chickpeas air fried with habanero seasoning on top. So this is what I'm going to be getting into today. What about you, Abby? What do you have?
I have chocolate dipped almonds that I had a wrestling match with prior to getting on the podcast. They have the resealable bags, but those things hate me. So scissors. Along with that, I also have some water, staying hydrated, especially because I think we have a lot of talking to do. I'm excited. Gabby, our topic today is shame and guilt. How you feeling?
I love this topic. This is probably outside of talking about myself, which I can do very easily. This topic is another thing that I could talk about for hours and hours and hours. I think the conversation of shame versus guilt is very, very important. So the first thing that I think would be helpful when we're talking about shame versus guilt is identifying what these two words mean. I think sometimes they're used interchangeably throughout our culture, but they have very different meanings. So for shame, according to Brene Brown's website, brenebrown.com, I'm going to utilize Brene Brown throughout this entire conversation. Her book, Daring Greatly, How the Courage to be Vulnerable Transforms the Way We Live, Love, Parent, and Lead, completely jump-started my recovery journey. It was the first book that I was ever recommended by a therapist. And when I started reading the first couple of pages, I was hooked instantly, and things that I wasn't able to make sense of for a really long time in my life started clicking together. So I'm going to be utilizing her as a resource for a lot of my conversation today. So she's where I got the definition of shame from. Shame, according to her, is the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. Something we've experienced or done or failed to do makes us unworthy of connection.
From the get-go, it strikes me how complex the emotional reaction is to shame. And we're going to touch on this a little bit later too, but the narratives, not feeling worthy or not having a right to show up and exist in certain spaces, and how I feel like some emotions come with friends more often than not, and shame is one of those that tends to be coupled with a lot of other things. Definition nailed it.
Absolutely. I really like what you said about the response that comes up, because I have in my notes that I remember when I would talk about shame with my clients, I would receive such a visceral response from people, even from people in my day-to-day life, friends, family. If I go up to them and I'm like, it sounds like you're feeling a lot of shame right now, people instantly become defensive. They're like, I am not ashamed. I would never be ashamed. I never feel shamed. I think it's because in our society, shame has a stigma attached to it of being weak. People, like you said, Abby, it's an emotion with friends, and so I think when people hear it, they like to paint anger over on top of it, or sadness, or jealousy, or a lot of other kinds of emotions that might be safer to feel.
Yeah, it's actually something I had comparing anger and shame. There's such an interesting overlap there. And I think, Gabby, we both had some similar phrasing in our notes as like how to distinguish shame and guilt. And for me, I've always looked at it as shame saying I'm bad versus guilt being maybe I've done something bad. And there's a very different level of ownership, whether it's like a personal trait, something that's fixed, can't be changed, is a worth narrative versus something that can be like grown from or adapted.
I think the shame part is interesting because when I say that I am bad, I think then the accountability is now taken away from what I'm able to do, right? Because if I am bad, I don't have to change my behavior. I don't have to take accountability for this thing because I'm bad. So you can expect this out of me, as opposed to I've done something wrong. Well, now next time that I do this thing, I probably am going to look at it differently and handle it differently.
I think the way shame is talked about in recovery spaces can look so different. I've had some people say like shame has no positive function. I've had others talk about, usually using a different definition of shame, how it's actually something beneficial. And I think that wide variety leaves a lot of people, I know it left me very confused on, you know, am I good or bad for feeling shame? Which, you know, shame about shame. I'm curious to know what your relationship is like with shame.
I think for many years, similar to the societal stigma of shame, I did not acknowledge that I had shame anywhere in my life. I maybe would have identified with having low self-esteem sometimes because that can sometimes sound less harsh, or you know, saying that I have low self-esteem as opposed to I feel ashamed can sometimes be a little easier to talk about. But I think that for a long time I didn't acknowledge that it existed because I did not want to seem weak. I think a lot of my eating disorder was about projecting this idea of being tough and impenetrable and strong and nobody can mess with me. And so I lived out of being angry for a very, very long time. My shame and anger are very tied hand in hand. And not until I started reading Brene Brown's book, 2019, is when I actually started understanding shame and understanding that it's not necessarily a good or bad thing. I know when Brene Brown talks about shame, she says it's a human experience. It's something that everybody has. I think the problem with shame is that it's not a tool for change. I think in my experience, shame has typically caused more destructive or more harmful behavior as opposed to providing a resolution or a change. And so I think for me, what I realized was that I was not getting anywhere beating myself into submission. I didn't have a lot of close, intimate relationships or friendships because I was afraid to be vulnerable and to put myself out there and to look like I was making mistakes. And so until I realized that my shame was building up walls around me that kept me alone and self-critical and unconnected, did I really start addressing the shame and looking at it deeper. What about you, Abby?
Yeah. I have had such a journey with shame. I used to love shame, but not in a great way. Shame was a justifier. Because I felt ashamed, I could do things that were harmful to myself because I deserved it. So I was really, really, really fond of when shame came around because all of a sudden it gave me permission to act in a way that wasn't helpful for myself. So I was really had difficulty reframing out what shame might look like that isn't permission. And I've come a long way to where I still like shame, but for a very different reason. I view shame as a litmus test, for lack of a better word. For me, the reason why the thoughts come in is like, I am XYZ, bad, not good enough, is typically because I'm out of alignment with my values. So I view shame as a red flag. It's a, like, before an earthquake, they have the seismic activity they can track. Shame is that wobble to show me that there's some sort of rupture with who I am and who I want to be. So it's weird. I view it less as an emotion and more of like a check-in point of what's behind shame. Because there's something going on here that's making me as an identity feel bad. Where is the friction? And I can go look at that and address it. So I've really reshaped how I view and interpret shame, which has been freeing. But now I like it because I'm like, ooh, that's an interesting thought that I haven't had in a long time. I'm curious where this narrative is coming from. And a lot of times I look behind it and there's something about my core self and my values for life that's not in alignment. So I look at it a different way.
Absolutely. I think you bring up a great point because I think shame can be a great barometer for how we're feeling about ourselves and the world around us. I'm curious, based on what you said. So beforehand, shame was the thing that was driving your life, and now shame is a tool that you'd utilize to understand where you're at in life. What does it look like now? So shame used to come to you in one way and then you would handle it. What did that look like? And then what does it look like now that you're utilizing it as a tool to help you better guide your life and your values?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I would say it presents similarly, interesting enough. It's usually a very intense experience. I wouldn't call it pleasurable by any means, but my reaction to it is completely different. I used to collapse inward when I experienced shame, and now it's a pause. It's like that red blinking light. So I still usually will have thoughts that the way I talk to myself through time has changed dramatically. I have an example. I got really excited about that example. I was at the grocery store this weekend and I had picked up a donut and I was going to grab soda, and the cashier made a comment to me about the content of the food that I was purchasing. And all of a sudden I felt shame, right? There was like embarrassment that was behind it. And I get in the car and I was like, why am I feeling so much shame? And I realized that it's not because I was doing anything wrong. I'm enjoying some great food here. Don't you wish you could have it too? You know, it was because that was so out of alignment with what I believe for myself. I believe that I can fuel my body with what feels good in the moment. It's very intentional about choosing those specific items. And that the reason I was feeling shame was not a quality about myself, but actually an injustice I was feeling in the situation. So it's still a really intense thing in that moment. Like my stomach dropped and I was like, ooh, you know, kind of still for a moment. So it's still really intense, but the way I can look at it is very different.
I think that's such a phenomenal story, Abby, and I'm really sorry that you had to experience that because I think it goes back to the whole point of shame is that it's things that you have learned from other people throughout time. When we were born and we were growing up as little kids, I don't remember myself ever like psychoanalyzing my body or my behaviors or the way I move through the world. But as time went on, people began policing and regulating my behaviors, right? You don't want to get in the mud. That's dirty. You're a girl. You need to be prim and proper and wear this dress and do this thing. And so I feel like basically kind of how the world has operated is it sets up a list of different standards of this is what is appropriate in our world. And then if you deviate outside of those standards at all, we want to shame you back into submission so that you fit back in the standards. And that's what it sounds like this cashier was trying to do to you is, hey, I am observing something that I wouldn't necessarily do, and I don't deem that society has normalized, and so now I'm going to provide commentary on it to you when it was not asked for, and what was the intention behind it? I'm unsure. I'm curious if you agree with that sentiment of shame coming from others.
It's a great parallel between what I now view shame as not being in alignment with something about myself. Previously, shame was an example of how I was in alignment with the world, more expectations of me, and so that made me funnel back in to what I thought I needed to do versus now that experience of shame actually made me dig in a little deeper. I happened to also throw a couple candy bars on the thing just as
just take that.
Enjoy what I'm going to enjoy. And I love it. But for me, like that example of shame, for me, it's showing it's out of alignment for what I want for my life versus in the past, it would have gone, I'm out of alignment with what's expected of me. I need to fall back in line.
Shame basically is a thing that people struggle with when they don't have a strong sense of self. So when you're trying to find validation from the outside world, hello to all my fellow people pleasers out there who basically go around being hyper vigilant, basing your behaviors off of how other people react to it. I think shame is a big thing that will thrive in your life.
A little shift, but I think something we talked about last week in our podcast with Emma, fantastic interview, was embodiment. So I'm curious how shame presents in different aspects of ourselves, or specifically how you might experience shame emotionally, socially, physically, how that kind of might look in different ways.
Oof. I think I've mentioned this on the podcast. I started therapy for the first time as an adult in my early 20s. And I remember my therapist had me draw what my shame felt like or looked like to me. So I had to do an image of it. And I remember the image was basically of me. I think I was maybe like standing or sitting reading a book. And there was just like this black, cloudy goblin monster hanging over me. And that's what the shame felt like to me. It felt heavy. It felt dark. It felt like I wanted to hide under a rock for a very long time. I think the hard part about shame is that the cure for it is connection and seeing yourself in other people and being vulnerable together, which I know we'll get into a little bit later. But I think the visceral sensations of shame cut you off from that. It makes you want to do the exact opposite. So when I'm feeling ashamed, all I want to do is lay in my bed and put all of my pillows over my head and never talk to anybody again. But I know the more that I do that, the more I'm going to be stuck in the shame narrative. So I think for me, it feels very heavy, very low vibration, very isolating. What about for you, Abby? What does it feel like in your body?
I think you really nailed it. For me, it's like the concept of shrinking. For me, shame is small. I feel very contained. I feel very insignificant. And it makes it hard to believe that I could do something else or be something else. It's very physical. Something that I challenge my clients to do in session all the time is like, why don't we sit back in our chair? Why don't we like have like a wide stance when we're sitting? Why don't we put our arm up on the sofa? Why don't we take up the space as we're talking? Because in my experience, shame can show up so much in our posture and our positioning that we might end up hugging something, holding something, trying to shield or minimize ourselves. And so having a physical shift in how we discuss shame can be, it was transformational for me because it's so physically prevalent, at least in my experience.
It's a lot about combating some of the different narratives that we have in our head, but I think it's also about getting into your body again.
I think I see it a lot in how clients dress. Something really oversized, something really muted, something where they can blend in and not be seen versus something more outgoing. It's really interesting, and I've experienced myself. I know you have too, just how that can be. And as much as it is physical, it's mental. There's so much words I feel that come with shame, and you've brought up narratives a few times and how significant something called shame narratives could be.
Yeah, so shame narratives are basically the stories that we create and tell about ourselves and our experiences. It's often rooted in past events and societal messages, but it can lead to self-deprecating and self-critical behaviors, and it can hinder personal growth a lot. An example of this in real life could be that you're at work and you're assigned a project that's due at the end of the month. When you send it over to your boss replies that some of the work is incorrect and it will need to be redone. A shame narrative about this story would be, gosh, I'm so dumb. I'm such an idiot. I can't do anything right. A guilt narrative, where we can actually make some changes, would be, man, maybe I shouldn't have gone out with my friends last Friday night and worked on the project instead. So there's a very different tone behind these two messages. The shame narrative really attacks our character. It attacks who we are as a person, whereas the guilt narrative is really reflecting on a behavior that we've done and how we can change it for the future.
Absolutely. I think for me, my shame narratives are a lot around what I deserve or don't deserve, life and self-worth, and it's usually related to something interpersonal. I think circles back, Gabby, to what you were saying about the cure for shame is connection. So much of my shame makes me feel like I can't be around others, don't deserve to be around others. And it's really that isolating factor. It's impactful. What has some of that looked like for you or for others that you've worked with that are experiencing shame? How does that end up impacting their lives, eating disorders, experiences?
For me, at least, my life felt like it was controlled by shame. So the self-critical, the shame narratives in my head were running my life. They were running in the behind the scenes of my life all the time. And I couldn't stop them. I didn't know how to stop them. So I'd be going out with friends and I'd constantly be hearing all of the things that I was doing wrong or the ways that I looked or, constantly just running in the background. And I think that led me to utilize substances a lot because I just wanted the voice in my head to turn off. I just wanted that self-critical voice to stop. And I think shame also allowed my eating disorder to thrive because with my shame, I just wanted a solution. I wanted to feel like I was doing something to combat it. And engaging in my eating disorder felt like I was remedying some of the negative self-talk that I was doing towards myself. I thought, well, if I fix this, this, and this, then there won't be any more self-talk that's critical. But instead, I fixed this, this, and this, and then my shame found a new thing to target me for. So it was an ongoing thing that I felt like I was battling off. I think the biggest thing that I realized for myself was that these narratives are narratives. These are things that I have heard. These are stories that I have been told. This is something I have watched somebody else say to themselves. And now I'm using that as the blueprint that I'm going to move forward with my life. And that was not going to cut it for me. I was not going to be able to exist in this body and in this mind with the shame narratives running the way that they were. Shame just allowed me to constantly give it the steering wheel of my life to somebody else. So I think combating shame was really about taking that back. What about you, Abby?
I can just sit in that for a minute because that's so true. It's so impactful. I resonate with that so deeply. I know so many others do as well. It's just, I think what really strikes me about shame is the double binds that I find myself placed in. If you're not familiar with double binds, you can think of it as like a catch-22. I'm just going to lose whether I do or I don't. For me, I think a big one was I'm not going to go ask for help because I should be better already. And so not only did I experience shame because I was struggling, but I experienced shame because if I got the support I needed, that I would mean something about me. And because of that, I struggled, which meant more shame. It's a cycle. Yeah. It's a double bind where there wasn't a way to get out of it. And I think that's something shame can be very unproductive. It can be very cyclical. It can keep you frozen. I think experiences that I had in the past can affirmed some of my shame beliefs, which made it harder to shake out into anything different. But especially looking at my eating disorder, substance use, self-harm, a lot of it turned into shame gave me permission to engage in those things that I wouldn't have otherwise because there's the issue of deserving. It felt like it opened a door and that I couldn't get back out of it or close it.
I think shame definitely keeps you trapped. And I like the word frozen that you said. I also would use the word stuck, keeps you stuck in these same places and spaces, because I think shame, like you said, it's a good test of maybe this is an area of my life that I'm not feeling super confident in, or I want to have some change or growth in. I think the issue, though, is that when you're hard on yourself and you're beating yourself up for that, you have to then focus on building yourself back up instead of changing the behavior that you were originally wanting to address and figure out. I think a huge piece of shame that can be helpful when we're talking about it is, we always say when we're working with clients, don't should all over yourself.
Yes.
You're shoulding on yourself, because it's so true. I should be this way. I should have done this thing. Well, in the present reality right now, if we're practicing radical acceptance and we know that that's already happened, we're going to focus now on what we should have done instead of what can we do now moving forward. And I think that's where we get stuck, is we're stuck in what we could have done instead of how we're going to move forward. So past oriented as opposed to being present and future oriented, which is where we get stuck a lot. I also think too, listening to people who aren't your trusted people is another way to get caught in shame. You do not have to accept everybody's advice for you or accept people's opinions on you.
I'm so glad we're talking. I was like, everything I could go into so many offshoots because there's so much around it and we don't talk about it often. I think it can be perceived as like a dirty secret, like I can't talk about this because of the nature of shame. So I'm really excited that we're bringing it, and especially looking at where does shame bring us in the present and like future tense. I think what you brought up was super applicable to me with accountability. I can pass on all the accountability because if I just look at I'm so bad, I'm so incapable of making any changes, therefore I'm not making any changes. And the treatment dependence that I've spoken about like here, it was very much fueled by my inability to take any accountability because I was so stuck in shame.
So we've talked a little bit about getting stuck in shame, about what shame might look like, about the difference between shame and guilt. What is the remedy to shame then? How do we heal some of the shamed parts of ourselves?
I've done so much work in this area. I like getting to talk about this because it can be so intense to think about the stuckness, the intensity of shame. But there are things that we can do. In my opinion, the focus is changing our relationship with shame. I have a kind of analogy. It's not mine. I've heard it somewhere in my journey and really, really stuck to it. It's of a man who's wrestling so intensely with a number of mental concerns. And so he goes into this cave to try to meditate, to try to fight these things out of himself. And eventually they're like kind of people in the room based on like he's in there. And he's like trying to be aggressive and they like fight back. And then one day he sits on the floor and they come sit beside him and he learns, what do you need from me? What's like our relationship here? And it's just so poignant for me of the impact of fighting something versus understanding it. It's like the idea of sitting in that emotion. So for me, a lot of breaking through shame is not silencing it or numbing it, which I think is natural because it's not the most exciting thing to feel, but instead pausing to try to understand it.
I love, love, love that. And I love the analogy that you use because I think it's so true. It almost seems analogous to our thoughts. I feel like for me, with shame, I'll have a thought, Gabby, you are stupid. And then I think, Gabby, you shouldn't think like that. You shouldn't think that you're stupid. And so then I feel shame about feeling my shame. And so instead of that, just saying, Gabby, you are stupid. And that's a thought that I have, right? I wonder why I'm feeling this way. I wonder why I'm thinking that. I wonder why that's my initial response and getting curious about things, sitting with it, trying to understand it as opposed to trying to fight it or trying to shut ourselves out of it. Because I think once you start realizing that even when your intention is to stop something, you're still putting your intention there.
Yeah.
That will completely change things for you. Move your intention into different things or get curious about stuff, but don't get stuck trying to think that you shouldn't be thinking specific thoughts because then you're going to go bananas.
Yeah. I know there's a lot. I could scream this, but I don't yell, and I want to save your ears, Gabby. You don't have to believe that you deserve something different to act as if it's true. I think for me, and I know so many other people, well, you get stuck. You wait to feel like it's true before we start to act as if it's true. And often it's the other way around. We have to prove ourselves through time that it is something that we can deserve and be worth and be different. But sitting and waiting for it to feel right to then believe it's true, a lot of times the actions have to precede it. So if the litmus test is when I feel like when I have signs that I deserve this, I'll change. And in reality, we gotta change in order to see anything different.
It's that opposite action thing too. It's that doing things that don't necessarily feel inherent to you can still be some of the things that are the most helpful. And I think that goes into my next piece that I wanted to talk about is vulnerability and shame, because that's one of the most uncomfortable things that we can get into when we first start recovery. Because if we're trying to combat shame for when we feel ready, I don't know if we'll ever feel ready to combat it, but sometimes we just have to do it. So something that I really like about shame resilience and healing from shame is the idea of vulnerability and how impactful that can be. So, as defined by Brene Brown, vulnerability is uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. It's that unstable feeling we get when we step out of our comfort zone or do something that forces us to loosen control. Example of being vulnerable might be that you're in a new relationship and you're the first person to say, I love you. You're taking a gamble. You don't know if the other person's going to say it back. You don't necessarily know how they feel, but you're staying so true to how you feel about this person. And you're so in alignment with how you're feeling that you're willing to risk it and say it first, I think is a beautiful example of vulnerability.
Absolutely. And it goes back to that connection piece. Something I think can be a great first step for getting into vulnerability. So many times our shame lives in our minds. Saying the thoughts that we think out loud can be such an interesting, like, whoa. Like if I were to say, like, Abigail, you are da 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 da, or I am, and then I hear it, it's almost, it's vulnerable, it's raw to speak it versus think it. And then of course, like moving to speak it into others is such a crucial like piece to have that connection. But I know for me, and sometimes in my shame, my mouth feels heavy. It's in recovery circles, sometimes we talk about like the 1,000-pound phone, and it's like that sometimes. I think with my mouth with shame, it's like I just can't even get myself. So even in a private space, like practicing speaking the things out loud, I think can be really helpful.
I think that's a great example, Abby, because I think when we hear something in our head and we've heard it a million times, it becomes normalized to us. And speaking it out loud, you can be like, what? Well, that was a pretty batty thing that I just said. That's pretty bananas. But you haven't spoken it out loud. So you're just operating like that is the normal soundtrack in my brain. I think also finding your core group of people who you feel safe to be vulnerable around and testing it out more and more and more. I know for me, when I was leaning into vulnerability, I had maybe a handful of friends who I could go to and talk to about the really, really icky, sticky things that I was feeling and experiencing. And I knew no matter what I told them that they would not judge me and they would come back with compassion and love. And so I think being able to share with those kinds of people and being selective about who you're vulnerable with can allow you to increase your vulnerability over time, because as you get comfortable with your people, you'll be able to start speaking your voice louder in other spaces.
My gosh, yeah. I think what you said earlier about a lot of times these narratives that we have are not ours. We've heard them, we've seen them, we've listened to them, and the people that we surround ourselves are, if we're around people who are shame driven and don't engage in healthy dialogue and are not open to being vulnerable, it makes so much sense that we feel trapped in shame. And finding those people, it's a fantastic point. That's a crucial key to stepping out of shame.
Yeah, because if I'm sitting at my house and I'm in a shame spiral, I'm sitting in my room and I'm thinking how awful and stupid I am because I locked my keys in my car, and I'm sitting in this and I'm feeling horrible about myself. And I call my friend and I say, hey, I locked my keys in my car. I feel like such a stupid, dumb idiot. And they say, you think you're a stupid, dumb idiot? I did that last week. Am I a stupid, dumb idiot? And you would say, absolutely not. You would never be a stupid, dumb idiot. I would never call you that. And then they say, then why would you call yourself that? And then you have a lot of reflection and internal debate about who you are as a person. And then you come out the other side. And I think that is vulnerability. It's where we're allowed to be seen. We're allowed to be heard. We're allowed to be valued. This is the space. And seeing ourselves and other people can really heal.
Similar, unrelated, Gabby, I don't know if you've ever gotten this challenge from a therapist before. I know I have. Refusing, like not being allowed to say I'm sorry and to say thank you instead. So the idea is, instead of saying, I'm so sorry that, for example, I was late to the recording today, I'm so sorry, instead being, thank you so much for being patient and waiting. That's vulnerable. That's scary. That's going from something that's more like depreciating, like I'm so yada, 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 to like, thank you. Weird, wild. Gabby, I don't know if you've had I had like challenges to do it for like a day or 2 days. If anyone else is interested in it, it's a really powerful experiment on how we speak and relate to others and how it impacts like our self-image.
As you're saying that, I'm thinking about, I'm sorry now gives my worth to you. I'm sorry. So now how do you feel about me? Are you mad at me? Are you sad with me?
Yeah.
Are you upset with me? Whereas, thank you for being gracious with me. Done. Finished. My worth is still here. I know that I'm probably late. I know that I probably did X, Y, and Z. And thank you for
Yeah.
sticking with me through that because you know I'm going to make mistakes and it's okay.
And we are so passionate about community. I know it's interesting we're in a virtual podcast, but that's part of the reason we have Snack together. We're wanting to build that vulnerability, that connection. So know that if you're listening to this and shame just feels so overwhelming, so unbreakable, that you're not listening to this alone. You're not thinking about it alone. It's something Gabby and I have walked through, still walk through and navigate. And it's worth breaking the chain.
Absolutely. And it's a process. It's not a destination. Like Abby said, she had an experience with this last week. I still have times where shame is trying to pop its head up in my life and run the show and I have to readdress those things too. So just know that it's also an ongoing thing as you continue to experience life. New things will come up and new narratives will try and write themselves. So I think the biggest thing is just making sure you have the space and the bandwidth to grab the pen back when you need to.
I like that. Grab the pen back.
Oof. Well, thank you all so much for listening to our podcast. We do weekly episodes. If you like the show today, you can give us a follow on Instagram, on YouTube. You can listen to us on Spotify, or you can email us at firesidesnack@gmail.com and send over questions or feedback.
Jumping in for a shameless plug, Gabby has also completed a fantastic Instagram post that talks about one of the books that we mentioned in the podcast today, along with others that have been really impactful in our journeys. Please check it out. It's worth a listen, a look, and we hope to see you next time. Thanks.
Bye! Fireside Snack is hosted by Abby Dingus and Gabby Buckner. Editing, music, and artwork by Gabby Buckner. Please email us at firesidesnack@gmail.com with your recovery questions and be on the lookout for weekly episodes. Thank you for joining us for Fireside Snack and for filling our cups up with gratitude. Enjoy your week.